So yes, I am cautiously optimistic, but I'm realistic enough to know that there are lots of challenges ahead, but I believe that maybe better than any time in the last couple of decades, there is an opportunity.
And I wonder, Filippo Grandi, the man who has the job that the Secretary General previously had, as he mentioned, in the absence of peace, Ambassador Khalilzad had mentioned also that war is raging and people maybe don't realize just how bad the situation is. Maybe it's not in the media as often as it should be, and that's a fair point. Is the refugee crisis underestimated as well, and the scale of it when it comes to Afghan refugees?
Well, I don't know if it is underestimated. Certainly, it is not underestimated here, where Pakistan is now observing the 40th anniversary of a very heavy-duty hospitality. But I wanted to make a comment from another angle. I was listening to the various speakers before me. You know, UNHCR, as the Secretary General knows very well, as everybody knows very well, has really been with the Afghan refugees throughout these 40 years. There's very few other populations with whom we have been so closely associated as an institution. And therefore, I think we know this population well. And if you go back to the history of this long exile, you have two significant moments. One is 1992, after the withdrawal of the Soviet troops from Afghanistan, massive, relatively large return of refugees to Afghanistan. Was not sustained. Country went into civil war. In fact, I remember as a very young field officer serving in Jalalabad, people were coming in this direction. We had to assist them on the way. That was the early 90s. Then there was the early part of the next decade, 2002, after the Taliban war. I was actually the head of UNHCR in Kabul. And Ambassador Khalilzad was actually the US ambassador then, back then. And we witnessed an amazing return. 3 million people. I remember in Torkham, trucks lining up with people wanting to return to a relatively fragile situation, but in a way voting for their feet in the hope that the country would remain peaceful and they could contribute. After so many years, they had already been 20, 25 years in exile, they could contribute to the rebuilding of their country. Now, I hope that the patient will live, and that with the support of everybody, but especially with the engagement of the Afghans, because this is their process in the end, this process will be successful. The peace patients will live. And then this may, once again, trigger a movement of people going back. I do believe that, 2 times, 3 times, people become more cautious, more time goes by, it's more difficult, but I do believe that we may be surprised by, again, another drive to repatriation. But we can't disappoint the Afghans once again. I can't think of any other refugee population in the world, other than perhaps the Palestinians, that have been more betrayed by history than the Afghans. And I think we cannot betray them once again. If the peace movement progresses, then as all the speakers have said, we need to build on the heels of it a real peace and not let go, because otherwise it will not be sustainable, and then, frankly, it will be too late to try it once again. So we have a chance here that I think is important, and I hope that everybody, in particular, if I may say, the Afghan parties, are the ones to live up to this responsibility to their own people. We cannot disappoint them. I want to make just a final comment. And I did mention this briefly in my opening remarks. Meanwhile, of course, because this won't be fast, This will take time, and yesterday I was very happy to hear the foreign minister speak about graduality, because this will have to be a gradual process. Meanwhile, hospitality will continue beyond these 40 years. And there, as I go back and finally answer your question, I think it is fair to say that yes, it has become very difficult to mobilize resources to help Pakistan, but also Iran, the other big host country, to shoulder this responsibility. Most of what is done now for the refugees in these two countries, in health, in education, in giving them access to livelihoods, is done by the host countries. Right. The international community, we speak a lot about burden sharing. That burden sharing has become minimal. So, we've been working with both countries on new ways to address these challenges involving development actors. It's very, very complicated, but we have an important discussion with the World Bank here in Pakistan. This needs to continue as we prepare for the most important solution, which is return. So we need to play on both tables at the same time, and we need the support of everybody.
Well, thank you, Filippo Grandi. And I wonder the process in Afghanistan.
So I think in terms of the hospitality, and just to quote you, Filippo, you talked about the heavy-duty Pakistan's hospitality. I think we should put things in perspective. And from my personal experiences, I recall this was in the early 90s, and I was a new medical officer working in the largest tertiary care hospital closest to the Pak-Afghan border. And I distinctly recall 30% of our patient load used to be Afghans. We never called them refugees. We never put them in waiting lines. We never put them in queues on hospital operation lists. We just treated them as our own. And I think it's important to unpack that word that you said, Filippo, and to understand very clearly that in this country, which had its own political and operational problems, with a severe financial crunch, we opened our primary healthcare services, our hospitals, to every Afghan entering the border. And it has been 40 years since. We made access to primary education free for all Afghan children. And if you look back at that time, we're talking about huge millions of Afghan refugees coming through the border. For a country to exhibit that level of generosity is very unprecedented. And it is not just that. We made access in terms of integration into the economy and the ease of doing business pretty straightforward. And if you go to some of our cities where they were passing through and where they integrated, the entire social fabric had changed. And that put enormous pressure on our infrastructure, on our public delivery systems, and the state exhibited enormous generosity, enormous and unparalleled generosity. And it wasn't just the state, it was the people themselves, because you had to be living in that city to understand the impact on their lives. Because for those poor people, and some of them were poorer than the refugees who were coming in, the cost of rents went up, the transportation fares went up, the labor costs came down, so they were earning less because Afghan refugees would offer themselves for much less. Their business space was crowded out. The children had less opportunity to go to school. They had to endure much longer waiting lines. And as I said, these were very poor people who opened their houses and their homes, and their hospitality was truly unprecedented. And not even once during the course of those decades did I ever hear any statement that reflected a xenophobic attitude, unfortunately, which was exhibited during recent waves of migration. So I think as a starting point, we should recall, and Secretary General was very generous in acknowledging Pakistan's contributions this morning when he so eloquently spoke. So I think that there's that dimension of hospitality before we talk about now and what we can do that we need to put in perspective. And I was just propelled by your words of, to bring some personal perspectives to the table. What do we do now? And I think that there is also a tremendous opportunity for us to assist. but in a slightly different way, because we're talking about repatriation, we're talking about them going, but there has to be the pull factor there. They have to go back to something that's worthwhile. And I completely hear you, and I completely, because the word of peace is resonating loud. So peace brings investments, coupled with the government's ability to accrue benefits equitably, will create the job opportunities, and that will make it worthwhile for the Afghans on our side of the border to go back, and that's accepted. But what is it that you can catalyze for the bottom of the pyramid? And that's where the Pakistani experience these days can come into play quite significantly. Because our Prime Minister has a signature initiative called ESAS. ESAS means compassion. And ESAS is a whole-of-government initiative to embed welfare into the mandate of all ministries. It's a social protection initiative. It's got allied livelihoods and jobs creation initiatives for the bottom of the pyramid, to develop human capital, which we know is so fundamentally important for countries to progress in the economies of the future. And over the last 1 year, we've recognized that there are some strategic coordinated approaches that you can adopt to catalyze the economy at the bottom of the pyramid. We're very happy to share those experiences with our colleagues across the border. For example, we've realized that by accelerating and expanding the cash transfer program, you can increase people's purchasing power, and that helps small businesses. For instance, we have come to believe that with some of the experiences that we've had with graduating individuals out of poverty, with some of the randomized controlled trials that we've conducted over the last couple of years, and the evidence that has shaped our policy around the graduation of very poor individuals at the base of the pyramid, we've come to understand how to combine asset transfers with interest-free loans with skill building. And we're in the midst of some massive interventions that we're rolling out. In fact, this Thursday, the Prime Minister is going to a very remote village to inaugurate an asset transfer program, which is built on the evidence from a randomized controlled trial, a very large program that we're upscaling. So these are the two pillars that we think are very catalytic for, for inclusive economic opportunities at the base of the pyramid. There are others that we have deployed at scale. For instance, the combination of financial and digital inclusion and what it does for economies at the base of the pyramid. But then with our own experience, we also understand that this is a very complicated business. It's about connectivity, it's about access to handsets, it's about telecom policy, it's about creative content creation. It's about a whole new paradigm of education. And then another important piece of what we're doing for these bottom of pyramid economies is our new initiative on rural value chain building, where an expert group is accelerated its work to develop a new policy framework where we will actually create the incentives for private sector to invest in these small enterprises, which will help value chain building. And of course, you layer it up with digital, you layer it up with women interacting with access to handsets, and you layer it up with handset policy with costs coming down, and there's a whole new opportunity that opens up for the bottom of pyramid. So I just wanted to say that there's innovative, cutting-edge work in a multi-sectoral, coordinated fashion, very much in line with the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals, very much leveraging the potential and outreach of the private actors that is currently ongoing with various strands and streams. And of course, we have a partners forum where we have all the development partners engage with us to bring to the table where their comparative advantages. Right. And with the leadership of our foreign ministry and the foreign minister, we're very happy to explore how we can technically cascade some of our learnings across the border, because it's fundamental to have the pull there, right, to have something worthwhile there for these individuals to go back to.
Okay, and I guess as we get the initial comments from Harun Shakhansuri and we open it up to further discussion, let me take that and ask you, sir, as the only representative of the government of Afghanistan on this panel, Foreign Minister in an acting capacity. What about those pull factors? The long and the short of it being that for Afghan refugees, whether they are in Pakistan or Iran or in Europe or the United States or elsewhere, it is not a country worth going back to yet, peaceful enough, stable enough to go back to yet. There's an argument that, well, the Afghan government needs to get its house in order for people to come back.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to
if you could,
as a grateful nation, thanks to the government of Pakistan for the hospitality in the last 40 years, and also thank the UN agencies for supporting our refugees here. I think every single Afghan who lived in Pakistan and also in Iran will never forget the hospitality that we have received in these two countries, especially in Pakistan, majority of us here, and we'll be grateful forever for that. I think we are in a very important juncture of the history. We have two things that we are discussing now. One is peace, and now on this occasion we are discussing the return of our refugees back to our homeland. The challenge that Mr. Filippo has mentioned rightly was we never got these two things right in the past. So we don't need to repeat the history again. Our proposal is that we should get our acts together and we should get these two issues right this time. Therefore, our proposal is that, and this has been discussed with officials of Islamic Republic of Pakistan as well, 2 years ago when ex-Prime Minister Khaqan Abbasi visited Kabul and also in different occasions. We do want our refugees to repatriate to Afghanistan back, gradual, and that's what we agreed as well. And for that, we are proposing we should work together. The two governments, Pakistan and Afghanistan, we should work together to have a comprehensive, gradual program for the repatriation of the refugees, which will, of course, consider the pull factors as well, and I'll come to the pull factors in a moment as well, which will discuss every and each single detail, and then we would like to propose that program to be supported by international agencies like UN. I think that's the only viable solution, because if we are talking in silos and we have our own plans in different organizations or countries, and we are not involving the two countries who are the host country and the refugee country in the population here, we will not have a sustainable approach to this, and I'm afraid that we'll be repeating the history again. We are thankful for the support that we have received on the Pakistani side as well, and thankful to Foreign Minister Qureshi mentioning it again that they are supportive. This is exactly what we want. We want Pakistan to be our partner in peace process. Without Pakistan being our neighbor and hosting us for 40 years, I think peace may not be possible. So there might be a lot of difficult topics that we may need to discuss between the two countries. And that should never be considered as a blame game. I think there are issues, difficult topics, and discussions that we need to take place in order to put an end to the 40 years of crisis also in Pakistan that you mentioned, and also the at least 4 decades of war in Afghanistan. The peace in Afghanistan has no loser. It's a win-win for everyone. It's a win for of course, for all Afghans first. It's a win situation and winning thing for the region itself. In the last 5 years, the Afghan government has been championing the regional connectivity. We are connected back to Central Asia, and we are offering a lot of connectivity in the part of the region as well. And the urban development plans, the pull factors comes there. The urban development plans are in place. We are going to invest heavily in our irrigation system now, in water management. We are going to have 1.5 million hectares of land newly under irrigation, ready for agriculture. We have been having a lot of refugees returning in the last 3 years as well. The process never stopped. The reason why we didn't have a lot of problems is because of our irrigation is developing now, and we had at least 2.5% increase in our irrigation products as well. And the mining sector of Afghanistan is now open as well for investment. So the discussion that we are proposing with Pakistan together to discuss the refugee issue and create the pull factor requires international support, and we should invest in things which will create economic opportunities and employment generation in Afghanistan. So there is incentives for Afghans to return and they will have a job. I'll give you just an example. There were Afghan refugees who were in Pakistan and they were making traditional Afghan shoes here. And we were importing the shoes from Pakistan. They returned in the last 3 years. Now they are producing that in Kabul and they have a big factory there. So that kind of conditions has to be enabled for them to invest. And we do have proper program for investment as well, for support in irrigation projects and also in mining, and also with UNHCR together on housing schemes for the refugees in Afghanistan. So again, I would like to thank for convening this very important conference. And we look forward to working together with the Pakistani government to discuss the issues that we have, and of course that does not mean any blame game.
And I want to use the opportunity to get Foreign Minister Qureshi's response to this.
Well, there are two voices. As the Secretary General pointed out, there is a voice who is in business, is the business of war, right? And they have something to gain if the conflict continues. There is a voice that has been enjoying a very exclusive position. And now, with this new arrangement, the approach has to be more inclusive. Who do you want to listen to? The voice of reason. Do we have a choice? My friend is here. Does he have a choice? Do I have a choice? There is no choice but to work together. We have to work in harmony. We have to understand. We have to collectively move forward. We can pick holes. We can point fingers. That will take us nowhere. I think the time has come. And the people of Afghanistan deserve peace, stability, and a bright future. I can assure you, my friend, that Pakistan is ready to partner with you. Pakistan is ready to engage with you. And Pakistan will have a very positive, constructive approach. We do not want to look into the past. Our eyes are set towards the future. So that is why. Thank you for coming to Islamabad. Our hearts are open to you. Our minds are open. We do not sit here with a closed mind. And that is why we have appreciated the role, Zal, you've played. We also recognize how important the role of the United States is. But let me conclude by saying, I think the Afghans, the people of Afghanistan, they're sick of war. They want peace. There could be an element that thinks differently, a minority. But the overwhelming majority of the people of Afghanistan are sick of fighting. They want peace. They want to live in peace as ordinary human beings. It's natural, one. The second point is, I think the international community is fatigued. They're fatigued. They have been doling out money. They have been contributing generously. And at times there are views that the money has not been ideally utilized. And there has been wastage, So we have to once again mobilize and convince the international community, you have gone that far, a little more help. Post, hopefully, a peace agreement is vital, is of importance for the resettlement, for reintegration. So you have been so generous, and you've paid a huge price. Everyone, every nation has. Most of you people sitting here, your countries have contributed. You've done it for 40 years. A little help at this crucial time will make all the difference.
Secretary General Guterres, you're more experienced than I am at noticing these things. Are we seeing some extraordinary diplomacy at play here?
I think that there is here an opportunity that cannot be missed for Afghanistan, for Pakistan. But it was said by Ambassador Khalilzad and by the Minister, for Central Asia. We can have, with peace in Afghanistan, a dramatic geoeconomic and geostrategic change in the region. This is the region, Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, this is the region of the Great Game. The Russian Empire and the British Empire competing. And where was the center of that competition? Afghanistan. Then the second Great Game with the Soviet invasion and the East-West conflict of the time. I mean, communist world versus... Where was the center of that second Great Game? Afghanistan. Now there is a chance of a third Great Game, but not a game with foreign empires disputing and making victims of the countries of the region, a game that can bring together Central Asia, Afghanistan and Pakistan and create fantastic opportunities. Central Asian countries are landlocked. What is their natural way to the sea? Through Afghanistan and Pakistan. Where did invasions come to Pakistan? Through Afghanistan from Central Asia. This is history. And history always repeats itself. So there is a chance here to create a zone of prosperity and enormous opportunities of development for Central Asia, for Afghanistan, and for Pakistan. And this is an opportunity that cannot be missed. And it will facilitate the return of refugees, because these opportunities will generate economic development, will generate new corridors, will generate new traffics, new trade, new industrial opportunities. So I think that this is the way for this region not to be anymore the playground of big powers, but to be the protagonists of their own development.
Ambassador Khalilzad, is the United States leaving the playground? Is it saying we're cutting a deal with the Taliban and then we're off and you guys can deal with the rest?
No, we're not. First, I want to endorse the very eloquent way that the Secretary General explained the opportunity. I think this is maybe a unique moment, and it will take not only a vision but a real strategy, real plans to deliver on them. And Pakistan, given its size, has a unique role to play. But with regard to the United States, yes, we want to reduce the burden. There is no question about that. 18 years is a long time. A lot of resources have been spent. Lives have been lost. But we would like to leave a good legacy behind in Afghanistan. That in terms of security, I have already mentioned what we're looking for, but we want to remain very much engaged and support Afghanistan. And I also believe that another opportunity that I did not refer to earlier is that the kind of vision that the Secretary General explains so eloquently also will help our relations with Pakistan. We want to have a much better relationship with Pakistan. With the war ending in Afghanistan, with focus on regional development, economic development, governance, rule of law, human rights, balanced development, our relation with Pakistan also will improve significantly. And I have said that repeatedly to the Secretary, to the Minister and to the Prime Minister and others, that the United States desires a much stronger relationship with Pakistan. And we're partnering for peace in Afghanistan, but we'll partner for economic development. And I'm particularly encouraged that the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the Army Chief, and the President of Afghanistan, they all say essentially the same thing when you talk to them about regional connectivity, about regional integration, about moving beyond the blame game that has, and distrust and mistrust. There will all be a degree of mistrust, but excessive, that we need to overcome that. And I think we're not looking for cutting and running, as some say, because in that case, if that was the case, I wouldn't be working on a peace process. We would do it just a withdrawal, and we don't need anyone's permission to withdraw. We could do it unilaterally. But all this effort that we have made is to get a peace agreement, not to repeat the mistakes that were made in the 90s, to avoid that. Some of us were around, as we were saying, so we want to learn from that. No, we're looking for a good legacy, and we want to have a stronger relation with Pakistan and to help the region. You saw the Secretary of State traveling to Central Asia recently, talking about some of these issues.
Harun, you want to come in?
Thank you. I think we are all on the same page, and we do offer to be the center of cooperation, not conflict, as the Secretary General has rightly mentioned. And in the last 5 years, we have taken actions that shows that we want to go through that direction. Our relationship with the Central Asian countries after 100 years, we are part of the Central Asia again now. And our trade balance with Central Asia has increased 3, 4, 5 folds with Kazakhstan, with Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and others. And that's what we are offering in this occasion as well. We don't want to be a burden, or we don't want to be a aid recipient country anymore. We want to be a responsible partner, and we are asking for partnership in regional economic cooperation. The only solution to all the crises in this region is cooperation, bilateral, regional cooperation, and also economic cooperation. I'm very much optimistic with the environment that is created here, and I hope that these words turn into actions and we see a positive change in this region. Thank you.
Filippo Grandi, after everything you've heard here, can Afghan refugees be confident there's the intention not to betray them by everybody involved right now?
I certainly hope so, but of course the proof of this will be in the pudding of all the things that have been said. I was thinking, listening to these very interesting interventions by the ministers, by Secretary General, by Ambassador. You know, of course, one of the most mentioned words this morning in the opening statements was solution, which is positive. It is great. We want to move towards a solution 40 years after the beginning of this problem. But I think that it is important that as we plan for those solutions, in order to avoid them failing very soon afterwards, in order to build that sustainability, we need to be very strategic in how we implement solutions in general. And I would say that the strategy should be to insert the solution to displacement in the broader strategies that have been mentioned. Regional strategies, economic cooperation. This is, of course, after the peace segment is over, because that's the first one that has to deliver. Then once you create that space, you need to build into it in order to avoid the unsustainability. And, you know, on the Afghan side, the minister knows this very well. He mentioned some of it. There are some very important foundations already built. Better institutions, identification of priority areas, tackling the very key land issue, because without that, there will be no return, and making sure that all those that go back are included in national development programs and services. That's the fundamental, these are the fundamental elements of a strategy of integration and of return. And by the way, as you know very well, this needs to apply equally to internally displaced people, of whom there are millions, and to those coming back from the neighboring countries. I would like to only add one other element which is quite interesting, and I did mention it briefly in my opening remarks. Almost, in a low-profile manner, the three main actors in this displacement issue, Afghanistan itself, Pakistan, and Iran, have been working on very interesting tracks in recent years. For example, the identification of unregistered Afghans that are present in both Pakistan and Iran in large numbers. These are not classified as refugees, but they're here. And the issuance by Afghanistan of passports to these Afghans. I say this because this, of course, does not apply yet completely to the refugee component, but if the causes of refuge decline, I think it is important to move also to a better regulated regional migration situation. Migration will continue to be indispensable to Afghanistan. Remittances will continue to be important. But it's important that eventually it moves from a protection framework, a refugee framework, to a migration framework. We're not yet there, but there are already the elements, and if we think of strategic directions, this should be one of them.
Right, and it brings me to a question for Dr. Sanya Nishtar, because as the process of absorbing people, integrating them, making life better for them continues, there are fears from human rights groups and from Afghan refugees who have been interviewed that when you formalize their stay, when you want to identify them and so on, there's this fear that you're going to give me an ID or register me only to force me back. Address that fear for me, because it's something that's brought up periodically by human rights groups, that when you identify formally refugees, one of the sides be used in order to forcefully push them back home when they don't want to or they feel they're not ready to go back home.
Well, I think those fears have to be allayed because we're not living in biblical times. In order to be entitled to any kind of social security benefits or any benefits from the state, or in order to operate in an economy, you need an identity. So if the Pakistani government is bending backwards and stretching its own system to provide that service to the Afghan nationals, which can subsequently be shared back with the sovereign country for them to use, it should only be seen. As easing their constraints. I think we need a dedicated campaign around this, because I circle back to that, to the same point. Of course, this is about peace and trade and regional trade and integration and the rest of it. But at the end of the day, it is also about people. It's about that 4-year-old girl who's been excluded from school, and it's about that 30-year-old mother-to-be who's entitled to have a delivery with a skilled birth attendant. And it's about that informal worker who should be in the formal system. And unless we are going to look at it from a people-centered lens, we're not going to solve the problem. I mean, hearing you all speak reminded me of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah. I completely understand that at the base of it is security. So unless there's peace and unless people are secure, they're not going to go back. We've had many failed attempts of international agencies paying them stipends, them crossing the border and coming back again because they haven't felt safe. So peace certainly is a starting point, because we know that that's at the base of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. On top of it is just food and shelter, and on top of it is economic livelihoods and respect and opportunity. And what I'm sharing with you is that there are ways to galvanize economies at the base of the pyramid. There are evidence-driven solutions which could be deployed. And I think that the international community needs to get out of that mode of thinking about this protracted refugee situation from a humanitarian lens. If we have to look at it from a solutions lens, then we have to look at the 21st century solutions that can really help you jumpstart. I mean, there's digital, and there's technology, and there's connectivity, and then there's this whole huge wild world of opportunity that it opens for you. I mean, in Africa, the Secretary General will bear me out, we are seeing that countries are going straight to 4G and 5G. They are really leapfrogging to a very different era, where solutions in terms of public service delivery, in terms of access to health and education, in terms of so many other things, cascade into their mobile phone stacks automatically. If governments invest in connectivity, in reducing the costs of handsets, a few other strategic things will not just galvanize the economy, but will also benefit welfare in a variety of different ways. Right. We need to think about these solutions with a very different lens. For decades, I've heard about Afghans and them as being part of a very big political theater, and that has to change. Right. We need to think of them as people, and we need to deploy the 21st century solutions which the market knows how to deploy. This is no rocket science. It just requires a new way of thinking.
And it's been a privilege and a pleasure just facilitating this discussion as all these ideas come together and we wrestle with these ideas. I'm going to keep to time so there's no knock-on effect and we don't delay every 2 days. However, I'm going to ask the Secretary General, sir, for you to just to wrap us up, to give a direct message to Afghan people displaced from their country.
The message now must be a message of hope. I think that conditions are met for peace to be possible. It's the obligation of political leaders of Afghanistan to do everything for this peace that is possible to become a reality. It's an obligation of all neighbors and of all countries that have been involved to do everything possible to make sure that no spoilers will undermine it. And then, based on peace, to have Afghanistan as the center of a region that is a region that has an enormous potential of economic growth, and then provide for the refugees enormous opportunities, not only to go back, but to go back to a country with a future of peace, prosperity, in the respect of human rights.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you very much.